Relations Committee to order. I think that several committee members, Jessica's not going to be on. I'm hopefully Ann and Stephanie will be on. I'm not sure if they're on now yet or not. The first item on the agenda, so that if there's no committee members, would on the minutes, Michelle, would you make a motion? So make a motion on approval of the minutes for the September 17th Planning and Stakeholders Relations Committee meeting.
Hi, John. This is Ann. I so move.
Okay. Thank you, Ann. I'm not sure, like I said, Stephanie's on, but Jeff can also second it because he's on all committees.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Jeff. All in favor of the minutes as submitted?
Aye.
Okay, minutes were approved. And the next item on the agenda is the Carnegie Park and Ride expansion project, the conceptual design review. Breen and Moya are on for this, or both Breen and Moya on?
Yeah. I'm on. Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Maura Egler. I'm the Transit-Oriented Communities Project Manager at the Port Authority's Planning Department. This morning, I will be presenting on the Carnegie Station Park and Ride planning process that we just wrapped up this month. So just for a little bit of context, this picture shows kind of the current conditions on the site. It's adjacent, the Carnegie Park and Ride is adjacent to the Borough building, which you can see at the far end of the parking lot there. It's located along West Main Street in Carnegie, and there's also sort of an inactive rail line that you can see running also on the left side of the property. This is kind of an aerial view of the park and ride itself. So you can see the bus turnaround loop there, and then below us is the station itself. So just a little bit of background here. The Port Authority secured a congestion mitigation and air quality improvement program funding, or CMAQ, from the FTA to help pay for the planning and construction of a new parking garage at the park and ride site in Carnegie. This funding consists of $6.5 million from CMAQ and another $6.5 million match from state and local funding sources for a total of $13 million. The grant was applied for in 2015 and awarded and allocated in 2019. So this existing parking lot is in really high demand during normal times. And a 2010 West Busway Transit-Oriented Development Assessment and Plan called for a new parking garage at this site. It also recommended that TOD, some mixed-use transit-oriented development, be built on the site as well. So this project presents an opportunity for the Port Authority to partner with a developer to do TOD on a portion of the site and to build a park and ride garage to accommodate an additional 200 spaces. Building this garage gives us a chance to reconfigure the site and better connect both the park and ride and the station to downtown Carnegie. So this morning, I'll be sharing the results of our planning process. Next slide, please. So this process was very unique for a number of reasons and was different from our other station improvement plans that our program has done in the past. First, it was conducted entirely remotely because of COVID-19, but also because it was different because the problems we needed to solve on this site were more operational in nature than they were customer serving. So we did a lot of internal engagement with our Transit-Oriented Communities Committee. And that gave us a lot of feedback from a variety of perspectives across the agency. We also engaged the Borough of Carnegie officials, as well as other government officials and community members and stakeholders. We started off with 3 different scenarios for this site, and these kind of 3 groups helped us to winnow it down to one final concept. Next slide. So we did hold some virtual public meetings. This was our first project that we did during the pandemic. So we were really starting from scratch as far as public engagement. But I think it was actually a really positive process, and we got a lot of great feedback from the community at large. So we did hold one borough briefing for Borough of Carnegie officials, and then we did 2 virtual public meetings that were open to the general public. We received a lot of great feedback. There were great discussions. This slide kind of summarizes the major topic areas that we received feedback in, and then how each of these topics was either addressed in the concept or will be addressed in a future design phase or with a future policy. And so this feedback was great, and it was incorporated into our final design. Next slide, please. So this is the final concept master plan for the site. This concept has two phases. So this is the first phase, phase one. You can see a parking structure here on the left-hand side of the site. It's about 430 parking spaces. This site allows for about 70,000 square feet of TOD space at about 4 to 5 stories, which would be in compliance with the local zoning code here. There is a really great abundance of green space and public open space proposed. You have a new drop-off and pickup area in the top right-hand corner of the site. And the bus turnaround layover loop, you can see there's a cement center island there that would have electric charging stations and driver comfort facilities. And yes, this layover can accommodate about 15 buses maximum there. So another thing that's really important to point out at the base of the site, you can see a dotted line. That is that inactive rail line that I showed you earlier. This is actually being worked on by the Borough of Carnegie with support from Allegheny County to convert that rail line into a trail. It would be an extension of the Panhandle Trail that already exists. It would be a bike path that would go all the way up to Carnegie Station. And it would be just an excellent asset to the site. The rail line currently presents a huge barrier between downtown Carnegie and this site. So we're very supportive of this trail conversion. Next slide. We're also supportive of this because it's basically required in order to have phase 2 of the site happen. So if the rail line were to be converted, we could then add an additional entrance to the garage at West Main and 3rd Street. We could also connect the bus turnaround loop through the ground level of the garage and allow buses to access West Main Street that way, which would just provide a lot more connectivity between the site and downtown Carnegie. So it's important to point out that this development, the site can move forward without the rail to trail conversion, but it would just be a huge asset and a major improvement if it were to happen. Next slide, please. So, so this, I'll show you some conceptual renderings of the site and how it may look. The first view is going to be looking from West Main Street onto the front of the site. Next slide. So this is how kind of the front of the building might look, a conceptual rendering. So you can see we have put in the rail to trail converted path there. This shows that path, shows a lot of green space, a lot of public seating, public space. You can see at the top kind of left-hand corner of the parking structure, there is a little building peeking out, which is the existing borough building, just for some kind of context to show that a building at this height would fit in with the context that exists already. Next slide. And the next view is going to be from the rear of the property on Logan Street, looking towards the more operational side of the property. Next slide. So this shows the bus turnaround loop and the center island with the electric charging stations, as well as kind of another view of the parking structure, how it might look from Logan Street. Again, you can see the borough building in the background for some context. Next slide. This is just kind of a summary of the numbers. Some important ones to point out: the first phase would allow for 430, around 430 parking spaces. Second phase would be around 416. Our CMAQ grant requires us to build at least 400 spaces. So in either scenario, we would be compliant with that grant. Another interesting point is that this site would allow for 80 additional bike parking spaces, which of course with the trail would be a major asset to the site and for people accessing our services via bike. Next slide. So this is just a rough kind of cost estimate of the project itself. As I mentioned, the CMAQ grant is a total of $13 million, with $6.5 million coming from CMAQ and then another $6.5 from state and other government sources. Our consultants did an analysis of kind of the costs associated with this design, and it was determined that we could do this design within our $13 million budget. This is the 10% conceptual design, so of course, additional costs could arise down the road, but as of now, we feel pretty confident that we can accomplish this project within the $13 million budget. Next slide. And finally, here's just sort of a timeline showing where we have been and where we're going. We're at number 7 right now in October of 2020. So now that the 10% design has been completed, it will move to engineering for development of construction documents. It's still pretty early to speculate on a timeline beyond that, but at the very earliest, we would expect to receive design funding from the FTA in March of 2021. Rough estimate that design would be completed in 2022, with construction starting in 2023 at the very, very earliest. And of course, this is all subject to many factors, including funding uncertainty caused by COVID, as well as any construction costs that might arise in future design phases. With that, I'll conclude and take any questions you might have.
Moira, just curious on the process. Was there much pushback on it? I mean, it looks like a great project, but I wondered if there was any community pushback on it.
There really wasn't. We had most of our conversations with the community were incredibly positive. People were very, very excited, especially about the prospect of the rail to trail conversion. I think it's something that their Borough Council and Planning Commission members and others have really been wanting to see for a number of years. And so the fact that we're really trying to encourage that and took that into account in this design was a big positive for them.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. Are there any questions of committee members or fellow board members? Seeing none, Moira, thank you very much for the presentation. Very good job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda, interesting. Next, transit plan update. David and Amy Silverman. Is David and Amy on? I saw Amy earlier, so.
Good morning, John. Good morning, committee members. My name is Amy Silberman. I'm the Director of Planning. I'm going to provide an update on our 25-year long-range plan, which, if you remember, we started back in February. Very interesting timing to begin a project like this. So we gave you an update last in June, so a lot has happened since then. Most notably, our public engagement throughout the summer, which did roll out despite the pandemic. It was a bit of a challenge, and we had to do a lot of pivoting and reworking how we wanted to make sure we heard from people. But overall, I'd say it was a success. We to provide a summary, ended up with 6 online public meetings, which was probably more than we needed. But as we sort of worked through what worked and what didn't work with online engagement, we were able to have about 170 participants in those 6 meetings. It says 170 plus because sometimes it's a little hard to tell. There were multiple platforms we were broadcasting through, including things like Facebook Live. So at least 170 folks, probably more than that, over 3 different platforms. We also, most interestingly, ended up doing 29 pop-up or micro engagement activities. You can see an example of that in the image here on the screen, which is in Shenley Plaza. Those micro engagement activities were specifically because we were rolling out some online surveys, and we knew that there were certain groups of people we would not hear from representatively in those online surveys, either because they're less involved in online, or because they don't have internet access, or don't have it all the time, or might be accessing it through things like the library, which aren't available right now. So here's a few other images of some of those micro engagements. They were largely targeted towards lower income communities, grocery stores and food bank pickups where we knew people were still actually going out in the public, and then transit stops where we're still seeing significant ridership. So these were specifically sort of targeted to reach some of those communities that we knew we probably wouldn't be able to hear from online. Next slide, please. Thank you. So what we heard at some of those micro engagement events, we were specifically asking people two different things. We were asking people for some of their feedback on what they value about public transit. And some of you may have seen some of that value survey work. We also asked our internal staff about that, and I'll speak on that in a moment here. And then we were most notably asking people about gaps. So what was not working in their system today? So we were able to categorize that. We're still working on parsing a lot of the online data. We did get over 750 responses to our survey about gaps and values. But we have sort of parsed through those micro engagements, and what we did hear from folks out there in the field, we were able to categorize into a few different areas: gaps in service, gaps in physical infrastructure, gaps in accessibility, and that might have to do with things like time, able to move between different transit vehicles, and then physical gaps, so areas that don't have any transit today. We did also do a few micro engagement events at places without transit service, near parks and things like that. So we are hoping to hear from non-riders in this process as well, wanting to plan for a future where all people could use transit. And then we also got some positive feedback in general. People were happy to see us out there and be asked for their opinions. People always like to tell us what they think. So it's always nice to hear a bit of positive feedback too. Next slide, please. So we mentioned the value survey, which was the second piece of engagement we were asking folks about this summer. What you see on the slide here is a summary of that values work. It was a pretty simple and straightforward, albeit very difficult question to answer. We asked people what was most important to them about public transit. We asked internal staff here at Port Authority, as well as our stakeholder group that we are using with this planning process. It's about 120 organizations that are interested in some way or another in transit, and then the general public. So you see here the blue bars represent how our agency staff valued these different words on the screen, how our stakeholders did, and how the public did. So they are ordered on your screen in order of the average of those three bars, from greatest on the left to least on the right. You will see there is some pretty strong alignment across the top 3 to 5 values, which is great. It's always good when we all agree with each other about what we think is most important about transit. The top 3 were accessible to all, meaning you physically are able to get on and off of transit vehicles. So that includes things like bus stop accessibility, having a sidewalk network, and other ways that make it physically possible for you to get safely to and from transit. Affordable, that one's fairly self-explanatory, that people are able to afford using the system, and that the system is efficient. So you do start to see some differences when we start to break down these different groups, especially the public group. Our public group, even despite our efforts to get out there into the field and get representative responses from groups that we thought wouldn't be as representative in an online survey, we still did not get quite the levels that we were hoping to get. So the response demographics to the survey did still skew towards higher incomes than our ridership as a whole, and away from people of color than our ridership as a whole. So that's something that we're continuing to work through and continuing to strategize about to make sure that this plan does really feel like it is representative of our community by the end of this process. And then another interesting note, just one more thing on this slide, was that is that equity, which is kind of a tricky buzzword. You'll see it fourth here in the list. Equity is something that both our stakeholders and our internal staff valued very highly, and actually our general public didn't. Now, that might be an educational barrier in terms of what is equity and how do we define it, but that is sort of an interesting note. And we actually see that less valued even by people of lower incomes, people of color, and some of our other groups that we talk about when we talk about equity publicly. So that's just an interesting side note. So we'll continue to use this this values-based work towards the end of the planning process when we start to actually have projects and policies and ideas. This values survey will be used in helping to prioritize those future policies and projects. Next slide, please. We can do one more click, I guess. So one of the things that the team's been working on internally, I won't spend too much time on this because we'll have more results of this in the future. But internally, we've been doing a lot of data analysis and modeling. We've been looking at things like transit propensity, which is the likelihood that a community, the percentage of people in a community would use transit. So that uses a lot of demographic indicators. You see a map here of kind of what that looks like. These are the places we'd expect to see lots of transit use. We can then overlay that with where we're actually seeing transit use today to look for areas for opportunity for growth in the future. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry for the animations. And then this other piece that we've been working on internally is digesting a lot of travel demand data. This data is all from 2019. It's streetlight data, which is cell phone based data. So it's not just transit users, it's all people moving within Allegheny County. These are actually the top 20 origin destination pairs in Allegheny County, which I find very interesting to look at. And we'll have a lot more data on this as the plan progresses. But you can see all of them are actually quite small. This confirms some of our other research and information that we know that people most often are actually taking really short trips. If you think about things like parents picking up kids from school or daycares or going to the grocery store, a lot of those trips are actually quite short. So they're not these big, from Monroeville to downtown, for example, as our sort of highest volume trips. So we'll continue to look at this data as we move forward. Next slide, please. All right, so finally, where do we go from here and when will we next be chatting with everyone? Right now, we are compiling 4 things that have been collected to date with this project. So it's that survey data that I mentioned from the summer, an existing conditions report that we completed at the beginning of the summer that summarizes all these past plans that have already happened, our transit propensity findings from that green map I showed, and then finally the travel and market analyses, including that streetlight data. And then in November, what we'll be doing is going out publicly with a couple of public meetings to start to actually show people lots of these different maps and start to get their ideas about what transit solutions could solve some of these problems that we've heard through transit gaps and other things. The timeline at the bottom from November, we are going to move into our 4th theme of public engagement, which starts to ask people to prioritize project ideas. And then our 5th theme, which actually proposes a funding strategy or funding strategies for paying for some of these project ideas. And then finally, a draft plan and final plan by early next summer. I will also note that the November public meeting series, we are actually hoping to do an in-person public open house. We're still working through the sort of safety elements of that and how that will work. But we are hoping to do that. Engagement in person just can be so much more valuable than online engagement. Online engagement is great, and thank God we have it in this time. But we are sort of striving to continue to push the envelope to hear from people in person. So we'll have details on that in the coming week or so. And with that, that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Amy, you were talking about underrepresented groups. So and you mentioned about education strategy on that?
Yeah, so for this particular survey, we were working with one of our sub-consultants, which is Campos, and they were helping us with some sort of thresholds for what percentage of survey responses we wanted to have in certain categories. So Title VI specifically protects people of color and low-income households. So those are sort of our 2 most notable communities that we want to make sure we hear from representatively. But our equity index includes 8 different factors, if you remember. So that also includes people who don't speak English well, people who don't own cars, seniors, children, et cetera, people with disabilities. So we just kind of have a touch point on trying. There were certain thresholds that we wanted to get to. We did get to the point where we are representative of Allegheny County, which is great. And we were hoping to go a little bit further and be a bit more representative of our ridership, which we know also skews lower income and with greater percentages of people of color than the county as a whole. And that's what we're still struggling with.
Yeah, because I was struck by the equity being 4th and the general ridership. I was struck by that. Back to the point you made about education, also. So I think that's important that people understand. If you're a higher income, equity might look differently than if you're low income, for sure. I would think. Are there any questions of? Go ahead.
I was just going to say, we actually didn't see differences in how people ranked equity across income or race. So I think it is really more of an educational piece that word is a little harder for people to understand. But we did see things like higher income people ranked affordability less highly than lower income people. So
That's true. Any questions of committee members? Stephanie?
Yeah, this is Anne. I have a quick question. Amy, in the transit propensity, I don't know, do you have a way of factoring in, or maybe it's a separate analysis, like parking and the cost of parking or availability of parking? Because I really feel like some of the suburban areas, if you just do the straight like transit propensity analysis, aren't going to show up, right? But I know they take transit or really want transit because they perceive the cost of parking as high or that it's not available, or they don't want to deal with traffic. So I feel like that transit propensity map might not reflect, how willing they are to take transit.
yes, that is a great point. And that's where, to answer your question, no, the parking data is really hard to get in general with transit propensity. And we struggle with this with things like our equity index as well. It's difficult to get destination-based data and sort of have that play into some of these models. Most of those pieces of transit propensity are about who lives in that particular census block and what those types of people are, and do we see through research that they're more likely to use transit. So it wouldn't take into account, for example, that people in this census block are going to downtown and that's where they work and it's really expensive to park in downtown. But that's where the streetlight data will come into play. So where are people moving to? And those things will all sort of be overlaid together to show us where some of these higher priority corridors are for the future.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Any questions of fellow board members? Seeing none, thank you very much, Amy. Thanks for the update. Seems like you're making tremendous progress here. So next on the agenda is OK to Go campaign update. Jim Ritchie.
Good morning. Thank you, John. And we wanted to be sure that you saw that Stephanie joined us. We can see here that she's on.
Thank you, Jim.
And good morning, Stephanie.
Thank you, Jim. Good morning.
Morning. The OK to Go campaign, and in the interest of time, I'm not going to dwell on all of these slides for a great amount of time, but so if you see something you have a question on, just stop me. I'm happy to answer. But the OK to Go campaign really is a marketing campaign that's intended to help educate people about the steps we're taking at the authority to help sanitize our vehicles and address COVID for riders so that riders feel comfortable as they use our system. We have a lot of people who have been working at home and their employers are now starting to bring them back, and they want to know, what have we been doing to the vehicles? What are we doing at our stations, and what other actions have we taken to help address COVID? So the campaign is really educational in that sense and a form of reassurance for those who want to use our system. And it will build out over the next several months. You're going to see the campaign is out there today. If you ride a bus, you're going to see some of these messages on vehicles. You're going to see it in social media. And it will evolve over the next several months and will reach people in a variety of different marketing channels. You can see here a sample. This is a social media post. This is something you might see on your Facebook feed that catches your attention. We're forcing our way into Facebook feeds through paid advertising, and we can then draw you back to a landing page on our website that has more information about the safety campaign. This is the same creative, but this is an interior card. So this is a card that you would see on a bus or a train. As you're sitting, riding, you look up and you might see something like this. And again, when you go to portauthority.org, you'll find that link right on the main page that draws you into our OK to Go, our Safe to Go campaign. Same type of ads. These are examples that you might find on the side of a bus shelter. in the city. And again, same creative, safe to go. Here you see on the large example, we're pointing out how we disinfect every bus, every route. This is the work that Don Rivetti's group has been doing, and we're bringing it to the attention of riders so that they understand how much effort is going into all of this. And this is the website landing page. So all of the materials really draw people to this page on our website. This is the top of the page. It draws you in. It has a lot of different kinds of content. So you have written content that starts to get into a lot of the details. Here you see the top of the page that talks about the disinfecting that I just mentioned with Don's group, the bus maintenance, the cleaning procedures that we're going through, explaining in great detail exactly what's happening on all of our vehicles. You also see on the bottom right an example of a video we have. This is our CEO talking about the importance of wearing masks. This was also on YouTube. We have it embedded in our website as well. More content, this focusing on bus shelter stations and garages, a lot of the procedures, the cleaning procedures that are in place at those locations. And on the bottom right, you see another wear your mask type creative that is on all of our vehicles throughout our system. This is current, so you'll see that creative throughout the system today. And finally, we're inviting people through all of this, throughout the campaign, we're inviting people to engage with us and ask questions. So if you haven't been riding and you're curious about something that you haven't seen on our website or in any of the materials, you can ask us. So you can call us. And today you can engage with us on Twitter, and you can also live chat with us. We now have that live chat feature available on our website, both in the desktop form and the mobile form, and you can talk to a customer service agent right there and ask your questions. So that gives you a sense of the campaign, and I will update the committee on this later as it does evolve, because there will be more pieces as it rolls out over the next several months. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Jim, my sense of it is that people have a lot of fear. So overcoming that fear and concern is part of the campaign. So I'm looking forward to that. People that don't even ride the bus, for example, calling to get more information, because again, nationally, my understanding is that transit hasn't been a real spreader of COVID as much as they thought it would be. But I guess you still need to take the precautions of wearing masks and social distancing and sanitation, for sure. Anyways, are there questions of committee members? Seeing no questions, fellow board members? Seeing no questions, what I'd like to do is to open up for public questions from our stakeholders group. Are there any stakeholder questions? Anything on the Carnegie Park and Ride? Okay. What about Next Transit? Okay, seeing no questions. And then finally, any questions of Jim on the OK to Go campaign? Okay, seeing no questions, do I have a motion to adjourn?
And so moved.
Okay, thank you, Ann.
Second.
So the meeting stands in adjournment, and I guess next up is the Finance Committee, right, Ann?
Yep, just give me a second while I switch over my notes here on my agenda. Okay, it's 9:05, and we'll call the Finance Committee to order. The first agenda item today is the approval of minutes of the September 17th, 2020 Finance Committee meeting. Do I have a motion to approve?
This is Jen, so moved.
Second?
Second.
Favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, minutes are approved. Second agenda item for today is the September 2020 financial statements and cash flow. So Pete, go ahead and fill us in.
Thank you very much. So if you're looking at your packet, this would be the second schedule of the 4 included in your packet. For the month of September, total operating income was $5.6 million under budget. 4.9 million of that 5.6 million was due to lower ridership caused by the pandemic. Access shared ride revenues were also under budget due to lower ridership from the pandemic as well. Our total advertising revenue was $133,686 under budget due to lower advertising commitments. Our interest income was below budget due to lower interest rates on our operating reserves. Total operating income for the first quarter was $16.78 million under budget. And as I've mentioned at prior monthly meetings, this will be indirectly shortfall.
Okay. So, I mean, I really don't know what to say to that. Like,
Austin, could you please put yourself on mute?
Yep, I'm good.
This shortfall in total operating income will indirectly be covered by CARES Act funding. From a expense and total subsidy perspective for the month and the first quarter, total expense was $2.38 million under budget for the month. This was primarily due to employee benefits being $1.34 million under budget due to lower active and retiree health care expense. Our materials and supplies are below budget due to lower diesel fuel prices and lower line item expenses in materials and supplies. For the first quarter of 2020, every expense category other than salary and wages is below budget. From a subsidy perspective, for the month of September, we were $28.7 million below budget, but this was due to a receipt of state operating assistance that we actually got the funding in August, and traditionally the budget was set up for September receipt of those. So overall, for the first quarter, our total subsidies are slightly ahead of budget. Any questions on that particular slide?
No, I was just on the first slide. I'm not sure I've ever paid attention to the interest income line item, or maybe not closely looked at it before. And that's a pretty huge decrease. I know we're hit with the interest rates decrease too, but that's pretty big.
Yeah, we're only getting about 0.2% on a 7-day rolling average on our outstanding operating reserves, and last year that was over, I think, 1.2%. So as interest rates have tumbled nationally, that also does impact our returns on operating reserves.
One other quick question. I didn't look back through the last couple of months, but the fare revenue, is that pretty much holding steady then what we've seen over the last few months?
Yeah, we're still down about like 60 to 65%. What we've noticed recently is that the fact that Pitt, CMU, and Chatham are for the most part still remote is impacting our contracted services. You know, traditionally we get on an annual basis about $11.5 million in contracting services from our UPass participants. And since those students, for the most part, are taking classes remotely, they're not using our services as much, so that is impacting the passenger revenues over the past 30 to 60 days. Any other questions on that particular slide? Hearing none, if you could turn to the next schedule in your packet if you're looking at the hard copy. That's the September year-over-year results. Our total operating income is $16.7 million below last fiscal year's total for the first quarter. And every revenue category is below last fiscal year's level. And as I've mentioned, CARES Act funding will indirectly be used to lessen the impact of this variance. Our total expense for the first quarter of fiscal 2021 is $1.4 million ahead of last fiscal year, and this is primarily due to higher wages and salaries and employee benefit levels, and also purchase services. Our total subsidy for the first quarter is $566,045 higher than last fiscal year, and this is primarily due to receipt of higher state operating assistance. Any questions on that exhibit? And then our operating reserves, we began the month of September with $131.6 million in operating reserves. During the month of September, we received approximately $42.3 million in cash sources from passenger revenues and subsidies. During the month, the authority used approximately $32.8 million in cash operating reserves to pay for operating expenses. So that left us at the end of September with operating reserves at $141.1 million. Any questions on that?
No.
All right. Oh, I'm sorry. Was there a question?
No, I was good. I'm good.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. That ends my report.
Okay. Well, we have a light agenda this month, and that was our only agenda item. So do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned. We will see you next month. Thank you, Pete.
Hi, good morning,
Hey,
everyone. Go ahead.
Nope, my fault. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's all right. Did you have a question or anything?
No, I thought I was up next. My bad. It's you. Go ahead.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's time for the Performance Oversight Committee, and it is 9:14 a.m., so I'm going to call the meeting to order. So the first order of business that we have this morning will be approval of our minutes of the 17th of September Performance Oversight Committee meeting. And so if I could have one of my committee members, we have Lori Magorski and Austin Davis. I know that Austin had to take a phone call. Austin,
I'm back.
with us? You're
I'm
back?
back. Yep.
Okay, great. And Lori, are you here also?
Yes, I am.
Okay, great. So I would request a motion and a second to approve the minutes for the September 17th meeting.
So moved.
Do I have a second? I'll second it. All in favor, please say aye.
How am I supposed to read?
Aye.
Aye.
Talk.
And I have Austin on mute.
Aye. Aye. I was aye.
Thank you. All right. So approval of minutes passes. Moving on to proposed resolutions. Awarding of bids. Mr. Tony Trona. Good morning, Tony. How are you?
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. I have 3 items for your review and recommendation to the full board. The first, operators, supervisors, and maintenance uniforms. This is a change order. At our October 18 meeting, the board authorized a contract with Work America, the uniform company for operators, supervisors, and maintenance uniforms over a 2-year period with 1-year optional term. The contractor has performed well throughout the initial term of the contract, and our operations and maintenance staff wish to exercise the option period. The contract permitted a maximum of 3% price escalation for the optional period, and the total not to exceed amount to the contract for the option period would be $1,273,466.25. Additionally, the authority also identified a need to provide employees with uniform washable and reusable face coverings to combat COVID-19 pandemic. And the staff has determined that the current contractor is the best suited to provide these face coverings. The total not to exceed cost for these uniform face coverings would be $130,000. It's our recommendation that the contract be amended with Work America, the uniform company, to exercise the optional year and include the face coverings in the amount of $1,403,466.25, which would bring the total not to exceed contract value to $3,876,216.25. This option year price represents the contracted rated, and the staff has determined that the prices for the face coverings as well as the optional period to be fair and reasonable. Number 2, vehicles and upfit state scheduled co-stars. The Commonwealth of Pennsylvania co-stars program has awarded vehicle and vehicle upfit contracts to several firms, and the authority wishes to make a purchase under these terms and conditions. These contracts are effective at least through November 19, 2021. Port Authority, Port Authority wishes to purchase 2 vehicles and the respective upfit packages under the terms and conditions of each of the respective contracts. These vehicles will replace vehicles which are at least 10 years old. So our recommendation that the contract be awarded under the same terms and conditions as DGS co-stars as follows. The municipal work vehicles for 2 cab and chassis work trucks, $91,500. For the upfit kits, municipal work vehicles to Sabre Equipment, 2 upfit kits for an amount of $64,310. Number 3. Maintenance, inspection, testing, and certification of fire protection systems. This bid was publicly advertised and our documents were distributed. We had 3 firms accept the invitation and 2 bids were received for this service over a 2-year period. It's our recommendation that the contract be awarded to Preferred Fire Protection an estimated amount of $165,620 over the 2-year period. This price represents a 5% increase over the previous contracted for these services 2 years ago. That concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Trona. Do any of my committee members have questions for Mr. Trona on either of these 3 proposals?
No.
Any other board members have a question for Mr. Trona on these awarding of bids? Okay, hearing none, I would request a motion then for us to move this forward to the full board meeting next Friday.
So moved.
Could I have a second, Lord? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, great. Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Trona.
Thank you.
Moving forward with Mr. David Huffaker for authorization to award general construction, plumbing construction, electrical construction contracts for the South Hills Village Rail Center Pit Restoration Project. Good morning. How are you doing, Mr. Huffaker?
I'm doing very well. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to turn it over to Greg O'Hare, our Assistant Director of Capital Programs, and he'll go through the details of this project. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Good morning, everyone. My name is Greg O'Hare, the Assistant Director in the Engineering Department. This is for a resolution for authorization to award construction for the South Hills Village Rail Center Pit Restoration Project. As you're aware, the South Hills Village Rail Center is where the authority performs maintenance of its LRV fleet. It's located in the South Hills, near South Hills Village, as you can see in the upper left-hand corner, circled in red. The bottom pictures show the condition of the maintenance pits, and here you can see that the pits are in poor condition with spalling concrete, deteriorated rail, and deteriorated rail supports that are in need of rehabilitation. Next slide, please. So the work to be included in the project is concrete approach and pit restoration, steel rail and support replacement, protective floor coating replacement, compressed air piping and drainage system improvements and hot water supply modifications, as well as electrical system and new pit LED lighting improvements and a new emergency shutoff system. The project is comprised of 6 phases with an overall contract duration of 497 calendar days from notice to proceed, roughly 15 months. The project was bid with a low bidder for the general construction being J.T. Thorpe & Sons Incorporated with a bid of $9,229,069.53. The plumbing construction low bid W.G. Tomco Incorporated $626,666. And electrical construction low bid Merit Electrical Group Incorporated with a bid of $1,328,000. We respectfully request the committee to approve the resolution for full board consideration. Are there any questions?
Any questions from the committee or from board members for Mr. O'Hare? Mr. O'Hare, thank you for those slides. Those slides are very comprehensive and revealing, for lack of a better adjective at the moment, but thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Hearing no questions, could I please have a motion from Lori, please, to move this forward to the board meeting?
So moved.
Austin, could I have a second?
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, great. Then this item moves forward for full board consideration next week. Moving on to item C with our agenda with Mr. Jim Ritchie, authorization to enter into agreements to provide general marketing services. Good morning, Mr. Ritchie.
Good morning. Thank you. The authorization would allow for agreements to provide general marketing services for the authority for the next 4 years. The authorization also allows for one possible option year. And really what the authorization does is it establishes agreements with businesses in 6 different areas of marketing, all related to the work that's generally managed by our marketing group. We received significant interest in this RFP from vendors with a total of 19 different proposals for these services. The not to exceed amount on the contract totals $5,650,000. And I'll note of the 6 areas and the recommended proposers that I'm going to go through next, all but one is either a registered DBE, WBE, or MBE. The 6 highest ranking proposers and the categories are as follows: advertising, marketing, and promotion, Red House Communications; public relations, Red House Communications; community outreach, Gatesman; market research, we have 2 businesses, Campos Market Research and WBA Research; and direct mail distribution, we also have 2 businesses, Direct Mail Service and Alpha Graphics. And the final category is video production, and that is Cut and Run Productions. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, and I request your approval to take this to the full board.
Thank you, Mr. Ritchie. Any of our committee members have any questions for Mr. Ritchie at this moment? Opening questions then to any board members, any other board members have questions?
Jim?
No, but I'm going to, even though I haven't been voting on these things, I'm going to abstain from any discussion since I represent one of the proponents.
Thank you, Mr. Lutman.
Michelle?
Yes.
I have a question. I just couldn't unmute fast enough.
That's okay.
on the categories that have two different companies, how is that going to be handled? Are you dividing, is that to divide the work, or do we have to select between the two?
Sure. Now, the way we handle that is we start with the highest rated proposer first. So whichever business that is gets the work opportunity first. If for some reason they're too busy, they can't handle it, it's not something that they have the capacity to take on, then we have the option to go and use the second firm. So we don't like to do that because it does create that situation where we're working in that environment and it's not ideal for everybody. But in these two particular categories, we felt it was important to go ahead and use the opportunity to have two different businesses in those categories.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? Hearing none, could I have a motion then to move this forward to full board on Friday? Lori, would you like to make that motion?
So moved.
And Austin?
Second.
Very good. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, this is moving forward to the full board. Thank you, Mr. Ritchie.
Thank you.
Item D, Mike Cetra, authorization to extend and amend agreement for medical and vocational case management services. Good morning. How are you doing, Mr. Cetra?
Good morning, Madam Committee Chairwoman. I'm doing well. Thank you for asking. And good morning, committee members and members of the public who are participating online with us this morning. The first resolution I have for the committee's consideration this morning would authorize Port Authority to extend and amend its current agreements with a pool of 3 firms providing medical and vocational case management services to Port Authority in support of our self-insured and self-administered workers' compensation program. In August of 2016, Port Authority issued RFP number 16-05 to obtain a pool of firms to provide these services. The services include the coordination and management of medical care and treatment for employees that are injured while on duty, and the coordination and management of vocational and rehab services for employees that cannot return to their pre-injury position. Following the RFP process, the board authorized the award of agreements to 4 firms: Gen X Services, Disability Care Management Professionals of Western PA, Allegiant Managed Care, and Wellco Rehab to provide the services on an as-needed basis via task-specific work orders for an initial term of 3 years with 2 Port Authority optional extension years. The total authorized not to exceed amount for the agreements is $300,000. In September of last year, the board authorized Port Authority to extend the term of the agreements with 3 of the firms, Gen X, Disability Care Management, and Allegiant, for 1 year with no increase in the total authorized not to exceed amount. The 4th firm that originally was awarded a contract, Wellco, advised Port Authority that its principals were retiring and they were winding down their business operations in 2019, so their contract was not extended. Staff is now recommending that Port Authority exercise a second and final option year on the agreements to extend 1 additional year with the 3 remaining firms through November 30th, 2021, with no increase in the total not to exceed amount. Subject to any committee member questions, I would respectfully request that the committee recommend this resolution to the full board for approval.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any of our committee members have questions for Mr. Cetra? Any questions from other board members for Mr. Cetra? So Mike, just for total clarification, we're just moving forward with the 3 and Wellco is continuing. They are retired, so they're done.
They are retired, yes.
Okay. All right. Could I have a motion, please, to move this forward? Austin?
So moved.
And Lori, would I be able to get a second to move this forward?
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions? Okay, hearing none, motion carries to the full board for further consideration. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Cetra, you're continuing with item E, authorization to extend and amend agreement with Interstate Acquisition Services to provide real estate consulting services.
Yes, thank you again, Madam Committee Chairwoman. My second and final resolution this morning for the committee's consideration would authorize Port Authority to extend and amend its agreement with Interstate Acquisition Services, a division of Century Engineering, to provide real estate consulting services to Port Authority. The services provided under this agreement include recurring property management and support services, park and ride and real estate asset management services, along with as-needed appraisal, review appraisal, acquisition, surveying, disposal and acquisition of real property support, and providing support to our technical support group and our transit-oriented communities group, along with maintaining our electronic real estate database, the regular maintenance on that, and keeping our hard copy real estate files in order. In accordance with Port Authority's procurement policies and procedures for competitive negotiations for professional and technical services, an evaluation committee was convened, and request for proposal number 17-07 was publicly advertised in the summer of 2017. In September of 2017, following completion of the evaluation process, the board authorized the award of the agreement to IAS for an initial term of 3 years with Port Authority, retaining the option to extend the agreement up to 2 additional years. The initial total not to exceed amount for the agreement was $1,062,000. The agreement is currently set to expire December of this year. IAS has performed the required real estate consulting services in a satisfactory manner, and staff is recommending that Port Authority exercise the first option year to extend the agreement through December 31st, 2021, and increase the not to exceed amount by $450,000 to ensure sufficient funds for the continued services. And I would note on this contract, it is a state-funded contract, so it falls under our diverse business rules. We're averaging DB participation from the 15 to 18% range for both. We have a DB firm that does the database, maintains the database, and we also utilize a DB firm as needed when we need property surveying services. Subject to any questions that members may have, I would respectfully request that the committee recommend this resolution to the full board for approval.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Sutter. Any questions from our committee members? Hearing none, any questions for Mr. Sutter from our board members? Hearing none, could I have a motion to move this forward to the full board next Friday?
So moved.
Second. Very good. Thank you both. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any abstentions? Perfect. Thank you very much. Motion carries. All right. Thanks, Mr. Sutter. Thank you for also resending our documents for all of us and for keeping us organized. So I appreciate your efforts in that.
You're welcome, and I'm glad I got the documents right this month. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving forward to the last item on our agenda with Mr. Pete Schenk, authorization to enter into First Amendment to Designated Service Agreement with Pittsburgh Public Schools. Good morning, Mr. Schenk.
Good morning again. So back in May of 2019, after successful pilot testing, the authority's board authorized the authority to enter an agreement with Pittsburgh Public Schools to transition students from paper monthly flash passes to PPS issued identification cards, which were compatible with the authority's smart card automated fare collection system. And among the terms and conditions, the agreement provided that PPS would pay the authority at the standard monthly pass rate for each Pittsburgh Public School student. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we have at least gotten preliminary notification that Pittsburgh Public Schools, beginning in November, would be transitioning from remote learning to hybrid. And so as part of that, we are requesting that we would at least temporarily move from charging the monthly rate to the Pittsburgh Public Schools to a per tap basis, since some of some of the students would not be attending 5 days a week, but something less than that. Our staff would review the usage and make any adjustments where applicable based on the PPS student rider usage. So this resolution authorizes the authority to enter into the First Amendment with Pittsburgh Public Schools in form approved by legal counsel. Any questions?
Very good, Mr. Shank. Thank you. Any questions from our committee members? Do I have any questions from our board members? Hearing no questions, would I be able to get a motion and a second to move this forward to the board?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Austin, could I have a second?
Second.
Okay, great. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any abstentions? Oppositions? Okay, great. Thank you so much. We, I believe, have concluded our business for the day. And so I would request one more motion to adjourn. So moved. Thank you very much. Okay, Jen.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to call the committee meeting of the Technology Committee to order. I believe we have members on the line, committee members on. So the first order I'd like to go through would be called for the approval of the minutes from the September 17th, 2020 Technology Committee meeting. May I have a motion?
So moved.
May I have a second? I will second. And all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thank you very much. We're going to move over to the next item, which is Tony. He has a bid, Microsoft Software Enterprise Agreement. Tony?
Thank you, Madam Chair, committee members. I have one item for your review and recommendation to the full board. Microsoft Enterprise Agreement Software Assurance. This bid was publicly advertised and our electronic documents were distributed.
Hey, what's up?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. How did that go?
Hey, Austin, can you put yourself on mute, please?
Wait, I'm sorry. Say it again.
No worries. Austin, you weren't on mute. Can you put yourself on mute? Tony's presenting. Thank you.
Hold on.
5 firms accepted the invitation. 3 bids were received for this agreement, software assurance over a 3-year period. It's our recommendation that the contract be awarded to the low responsible bidder, which was Soft Choice Corporation, and the estimated amount of $970,056.36 over a 3-year period. This price is not comparable to previous contract prices for these services 5 years ago due to the operating system updates and changes. However, the staff has determined that the pricing was fair and reasonable and consistent with funds budgeted. That concludes my report, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Trona. So are there any questions related to the bid proposed from committee members or members of the board? Seeing none, I will ask for a motion for approval.
So moved.
Lori, thank you, Lori. And I will
Second.
Oh, thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, we're going to move on to the next item. I believe we have a presentation. It's going to be Jeff, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yep.
All right, please.
Good morning, members of the board. My name is Jeff Nichols. I'm the Information Security Manager for the Port Authority. I chose kind of a dramatic title here, although I inserted a not just. Port Authority is definitely under current attack via email from an attacker sending us phishing emails, and I'll explain what that means in a minute. That's bad news. The neutral news is that we're not alone in that, right? Lots of other companies across the country are facing similar attacks. Unfortunately, it's just part of the threat landscape that we experience as folks who operate with working internet connections. Next slide, please. Next. Thanks. So as I said, we're under current attack being a phishing campaign. If you don't know what a phishing campaign is, phishing is where somebody sends you an email and there's a link in it where they're trying to either get you to download and install a malicious program and or to get you to compromise your own credentials so that they can exploit that in various ways. The current details of our attack is we've been attacked 1 to 3 times a week by what appears to be the same attacker, sometimes 3 to 5 times a day, roughly 40 to 50 employees affected every single time. Emails all concern various kinds of employee information. That's kind of the hook that the attacker is using to draw people in to hopefully click on their malicious payload. So supposedly bonuses, customer complaints, employee terminations, new employee training, or a lawsuit or other legal matters. Emails all use kind of the same attack techniques. They link to a Google document, and if you're unfamiliar, Google has its own kind of Office suite that you can access online where you can create spreadsheets or word processing documents. And then inside the Google document that they linked, there's a PDF, an Adobe portable document format that's actually a malicious program that tries to do bad stuff to the computer. Next slide, please. So I've kind of included some examples that employees have forwarded to me. If you see the blue boxes, I've actually blocked out who the senders were and who the signatories were. One of the interesting things about this particular chain of attacks is, some attackers will actually make junk email addresses to send to you that can't be traced back to a human being. In the case of this particular attack, all of these emails have come from legitimate companies whose own emails in fact were compromised and then used to, in this case, attack us. And I'm sure we're not alone in this. Whoever's doing this is also doing this to other companies. So in this case, this was sent to one of our legal folks, and both the sender and there was a real logo from an actual law firm, and it looked like a legitimate legal document. The good news is that the person in question, Mike Citra, actually forwarded this to me and said, and this is kind of an effort that the Port Authority has gone on an ongoing basis, is I want people to forward things to me that are questionable. In this case, the person in question forwarded this to me. Hey, I'm not sure if this is legitimate. What do you think? And then I have some tools where I can open these emails safely and not expose the Port Authority's assets to compromise. And it turned out to be not legitimate. Next slide, please. Next, yeah. And this is actually what is interesting. In the case of, go back, please. Go back, please. Thank you. This is actually what was interesting. In the case of this last email, what this actually took the person to, if you clicked on that link, was what looked like, for those of us who are using Office 365 and or Windows 10, it looks like a regular Microsoft Live sign-in. However, what I've highlighted in yellow at the top is the address bar. It actually is a Google address, URL or address. So in this case, what they're trying to do is they're trying to trick you into entering your Windows Live or your Office 365 credentials into this. And the interesting thing about this is if you do that, if you enter your real credentials, this page will validate the fact that you've entered your real credentials, which tells the attacker, hey, I got a live one here. So then they can either use those credentials to compromise our own assets or use that person's credentials to send out further attacks just like we've been receiving. Kind of the reason that I'm spending time talking about this is something that we should all be conscious of, both in our business and our personal lives. I have seen attack emails with landing pages like this, exactly like this, that come to my personal email, and I'm sure if you check your spam folders, a lot of you have received similar ones. It's just kind of keep in mind that you should always look at the address of a page, even if it looks like a Microsoft page. In this case, it isn't. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is an example of kind of what our employees have been receiving. Here's a copy of a list of all the people who are being terminated. If you click on that, it takes you to a Google Doc, and click here to download the PDF of the people who are being terminated. Obviously, that's not true. For lots of reasons, we don't outsource those kinds of functions, nor do we terminate people by email. So, yeah. Next slide, please. Yeah, same kind of thing here, right? Again, sent to one of our legal folks. This one is about supposedly an annual bonus. In one of the cases, and I think it was this one, when I actually examined where they were hosting the malicious payload, it was actually on the web server of a car dealership in Georgia, right? And clearly a car dealership in Georgia is not giving out bonuses to our employees. Next slide, please. Yeah, so we've taken a bunch of countermeasures, but before I go through the individual countermeasures, I want to kind of call attention to, you know, we take a lot of technical countermeasures. We have technology software tools in place to kind of block these malicious payloads, to stop these things from happening. However, in large part, you know, in this particular case, these emails were getting through those technical tools, and what I was relying on is the relationships and kind of the education and culture that we've built up, that where people are aware, people are watching out, people at the Port Authority are questioning whether things look legitimate and forwarding them on and getting help with those things. And without technical tools are great, but really the last line of defense and the most important line of defense is always our people being aware and working with each other and willing to talk about this. So kind of the countermeasures we've taken in the case of this particular campaign, we've sent out numerous company-wide emails on regular intervals to kind of raise employees' awareness. In some cases, we actually include the text of the email so that people know, like, hey, if you see something like this, it's not legitimate. We continue to work directly with the vendor of our email filters to kind of tune these messages away. We have tools in place that review all of the emails that are coming into the Port Authority. And in this case, these emails have not been being caught by that company, and we continue to work with them to make sure that fewer of these get through. We've signed a contract recently for a formal security awareness program with a new vendor called KnowBefore. And then an additional step, a lot of these malicious programs are not, when they go through our filtering tools, are not being detected as malicious. So what's happening is that the attacker, in this case, is sending, you know, relatively unique or newly compiled programs to us in a direct effort to avoid our malicious filtering tools. And so we continue, when I see programs like that are making it through, I submit those programs to various analysis sites so that those programs are flagged malicious for other actors. And in the case where real companies were compromised, which is every case so far that I've seen from this particular attacker, where I can determine contact information, I'll actually reach out to those companies, just trying to be a good corporate citizen, right? And let those companies know, hey, your email's been compromised. Hey, there's a malicious thing that's being hosted on your website, to make them aware of the compromise, you know, and hopefully, God forbid, if that would ever happen to us, you know, we'll be paid forward similarly, that someone will let us know if this happens to us, although I hope it doesn't. And with that, that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Hello, Jeff. As board members, is there anything we should be looking for? Obviously, we receive a lot of emails, and then we also get emails from the Port Authority. Should we be double checking them before we open them? What can we do to help protect the system?
Sure. So that's a great question, you know, and that's exactly the kind of things that I mean when I say that I rely on individuals to be aware. I think, you know, there's lots of things that you can look at. One, you know, if you get an email with an attachment or a link to an outside resource, are you expecting it from that person, right? You know, one of the things that leaped out to the employees is they got an email from somebody saying, you know, hey, you're being fired, click here for the termination list, and it was from an supposedly outsourced function, right? If you receive an invoice and you never have received an invoice from a person, and it's an attachment sending you an invoice, are you expecting that, right? If you receive a communication from somebody that, you know, maybe you've received a bunch of emails from them and the language looks a little off, and they're sending you an attachment, right? It doesn't seem like a way that they write. Like, I mean, what I would encourage you to do is, you know, whenever you're looking at an email, particularly ones with links to outside resources or with attachments, kind of trust your inner voice. Does this seem right to me? Does this seem in character with this person, right? And there's lots of ways to combat this. If you're receiving it on the Port Authority's email system, or even if you're not, quite frankly, feel free to forward those kinds of things to me. It's literally my job to review these, and I'll look at a bunch of technical information in the email, look for information about the company, and trying to figure out if they're legitimate. Another great step, and I think you suggested it yourself, is if I'm receiving something that's out of character for the person, reach out to the person in question directly. Hey, Sally, did you send this to me for real? Seems kind of weird. What's up with this invoice or link or attachment? In some cases, when you reach out to the person directly, and it's happened a ton for these kinds of emails that we've received at the Port Authority, the person says, no, my email's compromised. I didn't send that out. Thanks for reaching out to me, right? So it's kind of a combination of, personal feeling, hey, this doesn't seem right to me. Sometimes there are clues about the language. It doesn't seem, a big clue is a lot of these attackers are not native English speakers, and the way that they'll write is not the way that a native English speaker would write, and certainly I'm not saying that all non-native English speakers are hackers, but in some cases that can clue you in that it's not legitimate, right? That it's not something that's coming from a native speaker who would normally send something to you. I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions from board members? Seeing none, I'd like to thank you. It's important that, although, this is something that most people, at least within the work that I do, you experience all the time, I think it's important that the technology division within our Port Authority provide us with information of some of the other work that they do have to do. People think that we just, pick people up and, plan routes, but they also have a very, very great group of people that protect our data and protect our technology so everyone else can do the great work that they do. So I want to thank you all for your continued efforts and also just providing us more perspective about the great work that you do for the agency that may not be as exciting as some of the other work presented in like John Tagg's committee who gets all the fun stuff. So seeing that, I think that's the last thing on the agenda. You do get all the fun stuff. I would like a motion to adjourn. Lori, can you do that for me? Okay, and I will second. And our meeting is adjourned. And I believe that ends our committee meetings for the day. Chairman Letwin, so I think we are adjourned.
Great, thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.